teeth we've had in the last 15 minutes. It wasn't all hunky-dory here. We couldn't find anybody who would take control of the airplane here. So, and the first thing in any airplane operation is make sure somebody's flying the airplane. Okay, because it doesn't matter if you solve the problem if nobody was paying attention to where the airplane was headed. So anyway, and we could talk about that, couldn't we, Eric? We could talk about accidents that happened in the past where everybody thought somebody else was flying the airplane. So
yeah.
All right. Welcome, everybody. It's Captain Ron and his merry band of assistants here. This is Fearless Flight Live for this week, and this is the place you want to be if you have a fear of flying. And or you know somebody that might be afflicted with that malady, or you just like watching us make fools of ourselves on a regular basis. So whatever your reasoning for being here, we're glad that you're here. We are exercising more and more every week. So I just told the group, we're going to dip our toes deeper in the water this week with the call-in attempt. I had a couple of contacts with people today, and I said, feel free to call us tonight. And we have a caller waiting. So I got to get through my shtick here and find out what that's all about. But anyway, we want to make a quick reminder to you to join the Birds of a Feather group if you haven't already. Keep helping us push that number over 800 so we can start our way onto 900. And we're going to have something big for 1,000. I don't know what it is yet, but when we reach 1,000, we're gonna do something for somebody there. Cash and prizes possibly. So anyway, tonight we're going to talk about your turn to talk again, the captain's corner, and I've got some things that have come up that are generic to everybody that has an issue with fear of flying. Always live Q&A, and now we're going to take your live calls on that. We got the flight attendants. Oh, she's lounging this week. She's not even in the corner there. So anyway, and flight attendants deserve every minute in the lounge that they can muster. So Diane's got a few things to talk about related to one of the updates in the news that we have. And I got a thing called community news. I'm going to show you how the Birds of a Feather system works, how people get support there. We have had a great experience there, and a little aviation news update related to the stuff going on out there. And I want to encourage everybody to sign up for the 101 online. If you don't live in Phoenix, or even if you do live in Phoenix and you've been 16 times, sign up for the online webinar. That's going to be the following morning, and we'll put the slides up there down the road. So, all right. So let's go, Dieter. Let's get into this. What's on your mind? And here's the number for those of you. Dieter has already probably put it in the notes up there if you need to see where it's at.
It's in the comments, yes. So.
Okay, in the comments there, and so let's go ahead and take the first caller, Peter, and we'll get off on that, and then we'll move on down the road.
Okay, so Abby, can you hear us?
This is Joe Whipple. Can you hear me?
Oh, Joe! Hey,
oh, there you go.
Thanks for calling. We just had a little bit of a discussion today. Man, Joe, thanks a bunch. It's like opening a lemonade stand, and you're the first buyer, even though we've done this before. So how you doing?
I'm well. I'm well, and appreciate you taking a couple of minutes to text with me earlier, and I took your advice and made some purchases, and we'll be talking again here real soon.
Okay,
look forward to it. I hope all is well with you.
Okay, and we might as well just share with the group what your issue was. You got a flight coming up in September, right? Sometime in September.
Yeah, I'm going to be flying from Phoenix to Syracuse. I lost my mom last year.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Well, thank you. And we're gonna take Mom's ashes to New York. So it's funny. I was watching your 101 video online, and that was one of the top reasons for people missing.
Yeah.
Fear of making a flight to be with family during funerals and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a similar situation. But in any event, that's the plan.
Yeah, that's one of the rituals that we seem to really be hanging on to in this culture here, and for some people it's mildly traumatic for them when they can't attend their parents' funeral, and your discussion was, you were saying, okay, Capt. Brown, what do? Do I talk to you now, or do I wait until I get the day before or the week before the call? And what I recommended is I recommend sooner better than later. And people want to kind of hold off and save that for the day before, thinking that they'll need like a booster shot to get on the airplane. And really, it's kind of the opposite. What I encourage people to do is go ugly early. Get the appointment and the coaching early. And so especially if you're getting the flight kit as well, because we can talk about things that you can do during the time that's to prepare you in advance for that, rather than leave it up to many of the people that call me do in fact wait till the last day or the last couple of days or maybe the last week, and then they feel that added pressure. And I realize that some of them call because they're down to the wire and they were hoping that there would be some, the flight of doves would fly over and the skies would open and they would magically be able to get rid of the anxiety before they got on the airplane. But in fact, it gets just the opposite. They get more anxious about that. So you took advantage of that, and you're going to schedule a session, or you may have already done that. And I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah. So it looks like I'll be talking with you. I saw the date. It was around about the same time that your next 101 meeting at Sky Harbor is coming up.
Okay.
So that'll be roughly a month prior to my flight. Now, you just answered one of my questions. So,
okay.
So fine.
Okay.
That'll give me 30 days to work on your kit and drill
Cool.
this into my brain.
Cool.
And last year when we spoke, this is your program, so tell me to shut up whenever. But,
I've been doing way too much anyway. So.
I was planning to make this flight last year, and of course COVID interfered with all of that.
Right.
But when we spoke last year, which was almost 12 years after the first time I met you down at Sky Harbor, back when you were still flying.
Really?
And you were good enough to, you took me up into the cockpit and showed me around, and I thought, had I flown that very next day or even that evening, I would have been in good shape. But then my flight, which was business related, wasn't for several weeks. And the only way I was able to make my only two flights that I've made in 25 plus years were both work related. And I ended up, in order to survive the flight, kind of induced my own, what I refer to as the Heath Ledger cocktail. And that got me where I needed to go. My first
Fortunately, you were still alive.
Oh, barely though, Ron, barely.
Yeah.
And I don't remember anything until waking up in my hotel room the next day, midday, after half the conference was all over.
Sure.
So we got to find a different way, Ron. We got to make it work.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because a lot of people have told me that over the 34 years that the downside to using alcohol and medication, and worse together, is that the best of the worst case scenario is that you're just out of commission for the reason that you made the trip in the first place. And it takes you too long to recover on that. So to some degree, medications can have a lingering effect also, but that's really good. And you need to pat yourself on the back for showing up and taking this thing head on. And you will see an improvement. Coaching, people say, what is it? Or I ask people, what is it? Because when they do a coaching session, then they tell me that it really helped and they went out and flew much more successfully. I ask them what it is, and nobody can answer that really to my satisfaction. All I turn out to be is a big fat placebo. However, I have been reading more in the literature in the whole thing with oxytocin. They used to think that just moms and females were the big producers of oxytocin because it was called the relationship chemical, or the relationship drug. And then there was a study I was reading about where they took men who had dogs, probably not unlike me, and they had them. They took a urine sample, measured their oxytocin levels, and then they had them play with their dog for 30 minutes, and then they retested them with another urine sample, and they found that there was a significant increase in the amount of oxytocin in their blood. So that may be, in fact, a big contributor to why you feel better when you talk to me or when you listen to a class or something like that. And it's a great thing to hold on to, at least. And I think to some degree, that's why the flight harmonizer and listening to other people and talking and connecting in the birds of a feather group, I think that may be why that helps. So Anyway, well,
Yeah,
thanks a lot,
that's
Joe,
for sure.
thanks a lot for calling in.
Thank you.
And go ahead.
Absolutely. And may I just feel, and this will be just my last two questions, but
Okay.
I'm assuming for the moment your 201 and 301s are not on for now.
Not yet. Not yet.
True?
Yep,
Okay.
we're working on that, and I'm hoping that by the fourth quarter of this year, we will have another 301 at least in the Phoenix area. I've got a whole band of people over in LA, so we may end up doing one over in LA, and we're trying to redo the format on that such that we can have a smaller group of people, and not require the in-class teaching all that day. Mainly put the 201 online, and Dieter and I have been discussing that regularly and frequently about how we've got to get the 201 online so that we can kind of prepare people. And then all we have to do is show up and meet and go flying, which is kind of what we used to do in days gone by. So we're trying to move back to that
Exactly,
and move on to the online platform more. So yeah. Yep.
Exactly. And finally, my last question, and I'm done.
Sure.
When I signed up for the 101, you have a section where you ask folks to just post a question that you would like answered.
Exactly.
And I know that you go over these topics, repeatedly, I would imagine, during your classes.
Right.
And it concerns triggers, but mine was this notion that. And you defy all of the preconceived ideas I have of pilots. Some of my fear
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, you're just very level, and my fear of flying stems from a stint with a friend of mine in college who was an aerobatic instructor who also gave evening instrument lessons, and we flew down to Casa Grande, and that's what did me in. Because we did a bunch of stalls over Phoenix at night, and that really wrecked. But in any event, my question to you in the 101 course was, are pilots, even when they give the appearance of being very placid, calm, very controlled, reserved personalities, internally really daredevils that don't recognize actual risk? If you get my drift.
Eric, we have a saying: if you get in the cockpit with a captain who says, "Hey, let me show you something," you lock your shoulder harness, right?
Yeah. The saying from the Wright brothers era is: "There's old pilots and there's bold pilots, but there are no old bold pilots."
Yeah.
They go the way of they win Darwin Awards, that kind of thing, but they kind of get genetically weeded out.
Yeah, as a pilot, the things that you really seek out to fly are the sensation of speed, and I'll say, flying in formation. For me, that was my biggest fascination, and so speed invites every pilot that I've ever talked to into at least one time in his life dropping down into the weeds and seeing how much he can scare himself and how fast he can go. So the airlines, you can imagine, take a very dim view of anybody who flies outside of the box. And so you're not going to see anything like that. And clearly what Eric said, the old bold thing, definitely, because the rookie mistakes, tragically, that you see a lot of times in general aviation are young pilots with not much experience. In fact, in the military with fighter pilots, they did a survey once, and they were looking at they were expecting to see that pilots gradually increase in their proficiency. And what they found was there was a higher incidence of incidents and accidents in fighter pilots when they got into between the 750 hour total experience to 1,500 hours. And what they concluded from that was that's where you thought you knew something, but you turned out you really didn't. And so once you get past 1,500 hours or so, and it varies, of course, from pilot to pilot, then you learn, you get better boundaries, really, and you stay within the boundaries of the airplane. But the serious answer to your question is we do not mess around, and that's one of the advantages of having two people up there, because you've got somebody right there to be responsible for and responsible to. So yeah, so we don't take chances.
That is the one polar extreme. The other extreme is the lack of vigilance. And when we met, you were responsible for, I think, with American Airlines, overseeing all the vigilance training.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
That's the other extreme. You got one guy that's perhaps bold, a little too bold, and then the other guy who is asleep at the wheel.
Yeah, and really,
everything in between.
Yeah, and let me temper that a little bit. The area of responsibility that I got into with in the airlines, in addition to simultaneously talking to people who were afraid to fly, was this whole role was called human factors, and it was about the fact that one of the things is when you're in an industry that becomes so safe that you no longer have the cascade of accidents that we had 30, 40 years ago. Now, how do you keep it safe in anticipating where the next problem is going to be? Because if you have no data points, namely accidents to draw from, you can't project into that. So that's when we came up with an absolutely incredible program. And there were a number of names out there, but we called it an ASAP originally. It was an accident or aviation safety action program. And what it was, and Eric and I have talked about this, where it gave us the opportunity as pilots that if we made a mistake, even with our peer pilot, our co-pilot or the captain you're flying with, and it may not have caused any kind of issue, but it could have. But we captured it. And so one of the parts of our training was to learn how to capture your mistakes. But even if we'd made one of these mistakes, it would have never gone outside of the cockpit. So they created a program where we could tell on ourselves, if you will, and we could write up what happened. And it would be without any kind of concern over punitive action or any sort of punishment. Now, they might call us in and make sure that we understood if it involved maybe some more training or something like that. But what happens then is now we've got a database that's filling up with could have been accidents or could have been incidents, and it's an unbelievable thing. It's so magnanimous, and it has really helped the industry become even safer than it was with the technological improvements that the healthcare industry. Banner Health, I remember, was one of the first hospital systems that came in there, and I don't think they've done it system wide with Banner, but they've isolated hospitals, at least when they started, and they came over and they said, "Hey, what are you guys doing? How do you handle things like that?" Because if you know, and this statistic's old, but it was widely reported that the medical community killed about 400,000 people every year due to medical mistakes. Very similar to the dynamics that go on a flight deck in there. So anyway, so that's what you were referring to for anybody else's benefit out there, is I was responsible for the training program to keep pilots current and keep them engaged with each other up there. Because after all, I've said time and again, one of the biggest problems with aviation is boredom up there. And we do have tasks that we have to respond to, and managing the fuel, making sure our flight plan is going as we had planned it. But the big issue is when nothing goes wrong, after a while, it's hard to stay interested in that. So that is the
exactly.
Yeah, that's one of the main things that we have going for us out there. So anyway, thanks again for calling.
Thank you again, Ron.
Yeah,
thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
You bet. Looking forward to talking with you.
Likewise.
Okay. If we have nobody else in the moment or any other questions, Dieter, we'll just.
We don't have another caller right now, but we do have a question.
Okay.
Let me just hit back all the way. It was from Tracy. Okay. So she would love to understand the difference between the Southwest 737 and the equivalent, like the Airbus equivalent that Allegiant apparently is flying or has part of their fleet. And she just wants to know, is there anything in terms of either safety, comfort, for fearful flyers that we should know about?
Eric, the A320s, I think so. So talk to us about the A320 and the 737 similarities.
Is she just asking about the difference between a 737 and an A320 in terms from
Yeah.
aspect?
Yeah.
They're not not really much at all.
Hey, excuse me, Eric, from her point of view first, and then maybe we'll give a couple of the operational things.
Yeah, it just without any operational stuff, all of it's just going to depend on seating, which airline has the most seats in there, what the highest density will be inside. Some of the noises the airplane will make will be different, but and how new it is in terms of comfort in your leather seat. And after that, not much.
The Airbus, I think the Airbus fuselage is slightly larger, right? Because they always were, but the Boeing now I know has modified the interior to make the bins so that they actually fit a suitcase
right
straight in instead of sideways.
Huge.
Yeah. So the headroom was a little bit bigger, and I think the width of the cabin was just ever so slightly larger in an Airbus, in an A320, that is. Yeah. And that is the equivalent airplane. You know, Airbus has a lot of other models, the A380, the A330, the 300s, and whatnot. But the two primary workhorses out there in the aviation industry, we call them narrow bodies because they have three seats on either side of one aisle. When you get into wide body, that means they usually have two aisles with seats spread across the whole airplane there. Things of interest, maybe the fly-by-wire. That's one thing, you know. And I remember. I don't know if you remember a couple weeks ago we were going to talk about. Doesn't matter. But the fact that Airbus went to a computer activated flight control system, and with that they switched from
cables and push rods.
From a yoke and like a steering wheel in the center to a joystick, like you'd see a gamer using or something like that. And there were some nuances to that. And I know what it was. It was the Air France 447 crash years ago, in 2009, I believe, when that crashed in the Atlantic there. And one of the problems that one of the contributing factors is that the two pilots could not tell what the other's input was. And so that is a nuance, but that's way beyond the scope of what we want to do for the caller there, or for the contributor. So anyway, not too much difference from a passenger's point of view. A little bit different. It requires different training for the pilots. If I flew a 737 and I bid onto an Airbus at my airline, I would have to go through the whole training program for the Airbus, because my skills on how to fly I would carry with me, and they would be useful in both airplanes. But the actual manipulation of the airplane, the flight controls, and the systems on the airplane would be unique to each one of those. So anyway, any others, Dieter?
Well, I think one thing to mention is that the experience for the passengers is a little bit different because of the sounds that you hear in an Airbus. Eric, do you want to really quickly, because that's almost you know, a point of, should I worry when this?
Yeah, quickly blew by that, but
you're barking dogs shtick, Eric.
Yeah, the airplanes are doing the thing for the same function, moving flaps, moving slats, that kind of thing. There are different noises, but the noise Dieter's talking about is the Airbus has a hydraulic power transfer unit that allows it to transfer hydraulic power from one side to the other should a pump fail, a heavy duty engine driven pump fail, and it goes right underneath the seats, right underneath the wings. And when they start up one engine, one hydraulic pump is off because the other engine is not operating. And the same thing when they come to the gate and shut down one engine, the airplane goes, hey, the other heavy hydraulic pump quit, so I'm going to operate this hydraulic power transfer unit, the PTU. And it does sound like a dog barking in the cargo compartment very loudly, and finally being strangled and dying as the engine slows down. It stops, and it's really fun from a bad standpoint to look around all the passengers sitting there pretending there's nothing going on, like there's a white rhino in a pink tutu serving martinis and nobody's going to talk about it or notice it. People on the wing, especially that haven't flown the bus a lot, Airbus a lot, are very uncomfortable. And it is a very strange noise that occurs during startup and during shutdown.
I had in the last week of probably 15 coaching calls, I've had at least 5 people tell me that one of the triggering events for them were the sounds on the airplane. So, and we try to point out that it's very difficult. There's not much that transfers between riding or driving a car and flying an airplane in terms of the sights, the sounds, and the sensations. And in fact, some of the sensations you feel in an airplane, if you feel those in a car, it means usually you're out of control. So that's why you get unconsciously triggered when we level off a little bit abruptly, or when we take off and you feel the G-force pushing you down. It reminds you that you are not in control. And it's one of those that can take your mind and put it off and running. Okay, we're already okay. I was going to say we're already up to 7 o'clock. Let's just skip down here to our aviation thing there with the Southwest thing. You want to do that, Diane? You want to introduce it and talk about
Do
it?
the intro. Why don't you go ahead and do the intro, and then I'll join in.
Yeah,
What happened?
Yeah, again, with the post-COVID, or not post-COVID, I guess, trans-COVID era that we're in now, where we're trying to decide whether we're in or out, and the airlines still requiring the mask. And there was an incident this week or towards the end of last week, where Southwest, a 737, they had a family, a mom, dad, and a 3-year-old, and they couldn't keep the mask on the 3-year-old, and it created a big to-do before they closed the door. And so as it ended up, they removed the people off of the airplane. The gate agents come out of that. So Diane is going to talk just a little bit about the devil in the deep blue sea, basically the nature of things like that happen for us.
We've, as everyone knows, we've been dealing with this now for about a year and a half with regard to the mask mandate. And currently that is set to expire on the 13th of September, but I'm pretty much doubting that's going to happen with the new Delta variant, that sort of thing. The requirement to wear a mask and the enforcement of it really, the mask mandate itself is a federal mandate. And so that is across the board for all of the airlines. And so that's nothing that we as flight attendants or pilots or individual airlines have any control over as far as the overarching mandate. How the enforcement of the mask mandate is done varies by airline. Each airline has a different policy. They may be almost the same, but they may be differing a tiny bit as far as the manner in which the flight attendants, if the door is closed and we're pushed back or we're up in the air, on how they deal with those passengers or the passenger that is not compliant in wearing a mask. So some airlines may have the policy where the individual is given a card. They're talked to by one of the flight attendants, and then perhaps both flight attendants, to ask them to be compliant. And if they don't, then they may be issued a card that says, basically, you've been warned, kind of like in soccer, I guess. And then for some airlines, that's not what the policy is. There are some that they're allowed 1 or 2 warnings, and then the individual, their name, their seat number, and that sort of information is recorded. And then when the plane lands, it is reported to our airline, that airline, and then ultimately the federal government that is keeping track of that sort of thing. And so each airline is going to be a little bit different. If we are still on the ground, the door is still open, or even if the door is closed but we're still near the gate, the flight attendant, if it's particularly difficult situation, will contact the captain, and there'll be a discussion on how to go forward. Because as we have said before, both Ron and Eric, that ultimately when we're up in the air, you guys are in the flight deck and we as flight attendants have to deal with the situation. So they're always very good about supporting our decision. It is a kind of a global decision, but ultimately we are the ones that have to deal with it on a personal basis. We don't want to be the mask police. I can't emphasize that enough. It is not my personal agenda to make any passenger miserable by reminding them to wear their mask. That's just not what we want to do. By the same token, we have other passengers on the aircraft, and some of those passengers may be immunocompromised. They may have other health conditions that it is imperative for them because they're wearing their mask and they want to make sure that everybody else is complying as well. And so they will notify us that so-and-so is not wearing their mask. And it becomes difficult to try to make sure that we are doing the right thing for everyone on our airplane. Having said that, you know, we try very hard to be very understanding. We certainly do. But when passengers become irritated, maybe somewhat combative, not necessarily physically, but verbally combative, that's not helping the whole situation. And we don't want to have a situation where we land and there's law enforcement or anybody that comes on the aircraft. So it is up to everyone on the plane to do the right thing. Keep the mask on so we don't have to create a riot, just a minor riot on the aircraft. Just so we can get everybody where they want to go in a timely fashion, as peacefully as possible.
When along that, when we started doing this human factors program that Joe alluded to and I talked about a little bit, one of the things that happened when we began to talk, we were the first major airline to include both the flight attendants and the pilots in the dialogue, because originally they said, well, just the pilots need this, you know, it's about flight safety. And then we realized that anybody on that airplane, and then eventually anybody that touches the airplane became involved with the same type of program. But one of the things along this line was, pilots, you know, want to be nice guys. Some of them are, you know, in their minds, they want to be a guitar player or something like that. So we would have people that would come on with guitars and larger instruments sometimes. Sometimes, on occasion, it would be a famous person. And so they would, you know, see the pilots and contact them privately and directly and say, any chance you can set this in the cockpit? Okay. And it was really not, we weren't supposed to do that, but, you know, trying to be the nice guy. Well, the problem is not on that flight, but on the next one, when you come in, now that person changes airplanes, has an entirely different crew. Maybe he doesn't have a chance to meet the pilots, or at the very least, and now he comes on board and now the flight attendant's stuck with that dilemma.
Right.
And so we set them up for a really bad situation, you know, out of trying to be a good guy, you know, in those days. And so that's one of the things. And people vary, you know, in personality, their affect, you know, whether it's the first part of a trip, the last part of a trip, whether it's been a good day, a bad day, or whatever. So, you know, the bottom line is you have human beings involved in all this, and it makes for, you know, too many rats in the same little shoebox. And so we've got to all endeavor to be more kinder to people,
right,
to each other,
consider
and try to do that. Right. Yeah. And Diane just gave a really good explanation of the fact that the conflict between what the book says and then implementing that, you know, in a kind, compassionate way. And believe me, there's nobody that I've ever worked with that wants to piss people off out there. No. And so the more understanding you can have, the better it is. And I've always found it's always better to be kind than it is to be right. So we'll leave that with that. Let me transition, and if the other three of you have anything to say about this, let me know. I wanted to talk just briefly about how well the Birds of a Feather group is going. This week, we had a new flyer Kimberly, I did some coaching with her. She got the Fearless Flight kit, and she flew, I believe, last Saturday. I think it was. I'm not sure, but so she's feeding back to me privately and to the Birds of a Feather group there. And what she was saying was, when she got there, when she got to security, she hadn't flown in a number of years because of her fear of flying, and so when she got to security, it slowed the process down. And I find that it's kind of ironic for a group of people called fearful flyers who don't want to get on the airplane and don't want to fly. Once you get on and you make that decision, now it's keep it going, and we don't need a toddler with his mask issues slowing us down, for example, or we don't need security. And so she said, I wish we could just go through security and get it over with. And she was lamenting, that we can't do that anymore. I remember it was 1959, we could go from the parking lot at O'Hare International Airport directly to the gate and never pass through security. And I thought that was pretty much, the last time, but I found out it wasn't until February 1st of 1972 when the official word came out that we had to have airport security. And then we've gone through all kinds of evolutions of that. But just to Kimberly, what I suggested to Kimberly is that, your wish about wanting to get through security and onto the gate prompted me to recall the last time, and that's what I just told you, the last time I remember doing that. Well, your wish wasn't about security screening per se, but rather the delay that adds to that. And to me, it's just another part of the problem. It's the story you tell yourself. And so the more quickly you can adjust, whether it's a toddler that has an issue with a mask, what the flight attendant said to you, or the less you can personalize it and just say, life happens, and try to isolate what you can control and what you can't control. That's when you really get over not only fear of flying, but a lot of other issues in there. But the whole point I wanted to bring up was the support that people are showing in the Birds of a Feather group to one another. And it's really comforting to see that and encouraging. So I don't know how much we got to get Eric on Facebook there. That's his homework for the next week. But I know Dieter has constantly reminded me how important it is to be active in there, and I have been. And I've had a lot of people come to me now in 15-minute coaching calls who otherwise might not have done that. So thanks to all of you who are participating. Thanks to Eric and Diane for their continued, or Dieter and Diane for their continued participation, and soon to be Eric's. And we'll bring you more and better episodes. Okay.
You brought something up earlier that I just want to throw in, because I had my last couple of weeks on some of my trips. I had one passenger who brought up something that you mentioned earlier, Ron, about the different sensations in the sound, and Eric as well, the different sensations and sounds on the airplane, and how that can be worrisome to some of our flyers. And this one trip, we were getting ready to descend. I had not given my initial descent announcements yet, but I was in the back part of the plane, the aft part, getting ready to get my PA system going. And you can tell, I mean, as you have described, you can, that slight feeling of going over, which we love, because that means maybe I can get a cup of coffee on the ground or something. But yeah. So we're
talking about the initial descent, I think.
Just the initial, just that fine sensation of going down. And this woman, the female passenger, who was flying with about a 10-year-old boy, turned around and looked at me. And I wasn't really aware of the fact that she was a concerned or fearful flyer, but she turned and looked at me with kind of a funny expression. She said, "We're going down. Is that a problem?" And, for me, I'm like, no, it's not a problem. Thank God the trip's over with. But I said, no, we're just getting ready to descend. And then, of course, I happened to, the timing was such, I gave my initial descent announcement so that everybody knew that we were coming in. But something that is so common for us that we're just aware of on kind of very subconscious level, it bothered her, we're going down. Is that a problem? So right. The more you can become accustomed to those feelings and know why those things happen, the better off, the easier it will be for you.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me, in the 34 years I've been talking to people, there is almost universally, everybody has this, as soon as they sense the descent, and it's like they have this sixth sense to know when this particular descent means it's about over, you know. And even the worst person who might have been chewing their nails off, you know, and cutting off the blood supply in the pastures adjacent to them, they immediately become relaxed and say, oh my God, it's almost over, you know. And of course, in my sixth sense, I remind them that, you know, most of the accidents that happen between, that's not true. But anyway, but it shows you how it is the story that we tell ourselves.
Right.
And that's a universal story. It's almost over. I can withstand anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had one other incident, and that was I was sitting in my jump seat. We were flying into Montrose, Colorado. It was really bumpy. And so both flight attendants, we both had to stay seated the whole time. I had an unaccompanied minor in the row right by me. And as we were bumping along, of course, as I have said frequently, my problem with turbulence is it puts me to sleep. I just love the feeling. But as I'm sitting in my jump seat and I'm looking up the aisle, I can see several hands gripping the aisle armrest, just gripping it. And yet this young fellow who is almost 10, who when I asked him what he wanted to do when he grew up, he said he wanted to live on the moon. Every time we hit, not fly there, he wanted to live on the moon.
Right.
But every time we hit a bump, he looked out the window and he went, wee! And I thought, I need to get him in a class of our fearful flyers. He was, and the whole time he was going wee because we were bumping.
We need to get him on tape for doing that.
I did. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
It was great.
I had a coaching student today, and he had a bad experience at age 13. But he said the most frustrating thing for him was up until that point, he loved the turbulence, just as Diane described there, and he was a weer himself, you know, and he regretted losing that. So, and he's a really talented musician, and he shared a website with him. So I'm going to see if we can maybe use that for some of our soundtrack or something down the road. So really cool. All right. Any final words of wisdom, Dieter?
The only one is that there was one caller on, I think, Dolce. You know what? If you come back next week at 6:30 Tuesday, we will make sure that we'll get you on the call then. It was just the way today went, but thanks so much for trying to call in.
Yeah.
And we'll get to it.
Ron, I got 60 seconds. I can do it in 60 seconds since it's not even 9 p.m. yet.
Okay.
One of the news items that's been coming out on the interweb, TV, and everything is the airports are running out of gas, particularly
yes.
I want to tell you guys, or as Ross Pro would say, you people, one of my favorite speakers, the pilots are never, ever, ever going to take off without enough gas in the airplane. They're just not paid enough to do it, and they're not going to. In fact, that's going to cause them to do what we call tankering into airports with a limited fuel supply. They're going to take off with way too much gas. The airplanes have the tanks and the performance to handle it. And by way too much, I mean landing at a nice airport on a nice weather day with still 5 hours of flying time of fuel in the wings. That's way too much gas because it costs money to haul that weight. But we'll tanker it into these airports. And two of the reasons I read, one of them kind of struck me as interesting, but part of it is supply stuff. Part of it is hiring fuelers who all went to the winds during the COVID, getting them back in training. It's not an easy job. They have to be thinking about what they're doing. We've talked about that on previous shows. And literally getting people that can drive trucks at airports that don't have in-ground fueling. The other reason is you may have seen on the news, because it's great drama, you might have noticed that everything west of the Mississippi is burned down at a great rate, and the firefighters are fighting like mad to try and put out these fires. And all those tankers, the jet planes, the turboprops, and the helicopters all use jet fuel. So out west airports, Bozeman, Fresno, Boise, Sacramento, Spokane, there's some big airports out here that are also big firefighter bases, and they're sucking up every bit of gas they can to try and keep everything burning down to the Mississippi. Well, that was shot at by a few seconds, but no.
Good. Yeah.
The bottom line is the pilots will never take off without enough fuel. Never.
Nope. Good call, Eric. Okay, everybody, we appreciate it, and we hope you'll become more and more comfortable with calling in and asking questions, because we really do want to serve you and not try to guess what might be interesting to you. And we love the feedback. Talk more about this, less about this. Anything you can do to make it more interesting to you all, we totally support. So anyway, so thanks, Eric, Diane, and Dieter, and thank all of you for tuning in and making it fun for us to show up every week. And whatever you do, we hope you have the best and bluest skies and happy landings. So come back next week for Fearless Flight Live. Bye-bye, everybody. We'll see you next week.